Welcome back. We're going to begin on page 5 of your notes, looking in detail now at jhana, what it is, in the Pali Suttas. So keep in mind, we're not, in the earlier session, we were specifically looking at paths of practice in the Visuddhimagga without regard to what's in the suttas. Here we're going to be looking at jhana in the Pali Suttas, and we're not interested for the moment at all at what the Visuddhimagga has to say. We'll look and see later, is it similar or different? So page 5 of your notes. And I thought I'd start, I just put a couple of quotes in here. Let me read them from the suttas attributed to the Buddha. Jhana is called the pleasure of renunciation, the pleasure of seclusion, the pleasure of peace, the pleasure of enlightenment. I say of this kind of pleasure that it should be pursued, that it should be developed, that it should be cultivated, that it should not be feared. That's a pretty strong statement. And here's another one. Just as the river Ganges slants, slopes, and inclines towards the east, so too one who develops and cultivates the 4 jhanas slants, slopes, and inclines towards nibbana. So, it's obvious, and I gave some other quotes last time we met, that the Buddha made a big deal about jhana. It was quite important. So let's explore. What's he talking about? What are these meditative states? The word jhana, it's a Pali word, it simply means to meditate. And there actually are a few places in the suttas in which it refers to a wrong kind of meditation. For example, if you've ever seen the statues of the Buddha in which his body looks like a skeleton, that's the ascetic Buddha, where he almost died from these severe practices of, denying himself food and all kinds of severe ascetic practices. So that's the ascetic Buddha, and it was said in the text that he practiced a kind of breathingless jhana, where he would hold his breath, for just, long periods of time. And, that was real explicit. It not only didn't get him to his goal, but it was harmful. So there's those few places, but in almost all places, the word jhana refers to these important meditative states, and there's 4 of them known as the 4 jhanas, and they're called the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th jhana. So at the bottom of page 5 here, I've got the jhana definition, and we'll read it. Let me read it so it gets on the recording. And this is my own translation, and I just say that so if you may be used to, like Bhikkhu Bodhi's got a very common translation, Ajahn Nisro, there's some others. So this is a little bit different. It's close, but just in case you notice any difference, that's the reason. So let me just read the definition. Quite secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states. A monk, so this is being directed to monastics, of course it applies to anyone. A monk enters and abides in the 1st jhana, which is characterized by rapture and pleasure born of seclusion, and accompanied by thought and examination. With the stilling of thought and examination, he enters and abides in the 2nd jhana, which is characterized by rapture and pleasure born of concentration, and accompanied by inner composure and singleness of mind, without thought and examination. With the fading away of rapture, he abides in equanimity, mindful and clearly aware. Feeling pleasure with the body, he enters and abides in the 3rd jhana, of which the noble ones declare, equanimous and mindful, he abides in pleasure. And then the 4th jhana. With the abandoning of pleasure and pain, and with the previous disappearance of joy and grief, he enters and abides in the 4th jhana, which has neither pain nor pleasure, and purity of mindfulness and equanimity. So that's jhana. So you can see already, you hear these words, and what does it mean? Like, let's just go back to the first jhana. So we'll quite secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states. So we need to understand that. And then you enter and abide in the first jhana, and it has 4 things: rapture, pleasure, and it's accompanied by thought and examination. Well, that's not giving us a lot to go on. So we need more. One of the suttas I've listed here, Mahavedala Sutta, it specifies certain elements from this definition as jhana factors. And this is important. It just appears in this one place in the suttas, but it's become very important because you'll often hear people really emphasizing this list of the 5 jhana factors. And so I'll just read this. It's in the middle-length discourses, the Majjhima Nikaya, Sutta 43. How many factors does the first jhana have? The first jhana has 5 factors. There occur thought, examination, rapture, pleasure, and unification of mind. So, okay. We've got these things. We still have to understand them more, but there's this 5. That's regarded as a standard list. The first 4, the thought, examination, the rapture, and pleasure, and I put the Pali here for you. Those are found in the jhana formula. The 5th factor, which I've translated as unification of mind, Chittasakagata, it's actually not in the standard formula, but as you can see here, another term which I've translated as singleness of mind, and you can see it's in the definition of the second jhana, and it's very closely related term. The suttas also tell us, not in the definition, but in other suttas, that there are 11 other qualities present in each jhana. And this is from the Anupada Sutta, which is also in the Middle Length Discourses, number 111. And here's a list, and it's very explicit in each of the 4 jhanas. Sense contact, feeling, perception, volition, mind, intention, determination, energy, mindfulness, equanimity, and attention. Well, 2 things I want to point out here that are important. First of all, there's a lot of mental activity. Remember, we were saying in jhana, the mind comes to, if you're in the Visuddhimagga jhana, your attention got you fixed. But here, talking about the suttas, this unification of mind, the mind comes to stillness. We use the term singleness of mind. We just used unification of mind. There's a oneness here, an unmoving quality, and yet there's a lot of mental activity. So the mind, there's some other parts of the mind that are moving, right? Volition, intention, determination. So there are things happening. That jhana is actually a very dynamic state with a lot of associated mental factors. It's not a trance, say. It's got a lot going on. That's number 1. By the way, these factors are going to help us later in really understanding the nature of jhana, and especially when we come back to look at what the Visuddhimagga is saying. Because also here it's saying there's sense contact, feeling, that's Vedana, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. Sense contact. This is an interesting question, isn't it? The Visuddhimagga says that when you're in jhana, and it's explicit, when you look at the definitions around it, it tells you you cannot experience your body when you're in jhana. Well, how can that be that here the suttas are saying that explicitly there is sense contact in jhana? Well, this will be one of our last sessions. We're going to look at controversies. This is a controversy. How can there be these 2 different kinds of understandings of jhana? So just be patient and we'll get to all of that. Okay. And then the suttas also talk about how progress is made through the 4 jhanas, and this is important also. This first says here, 5 factors are abandoned and 5 are present in the first jhana. And then it lists 5 hindrances: sense desire, ill will, sloth and torpor, restlessness and remorse, and doubt. 5 hindrances are abandoned, so they can't arise when you're in jhana. And the 5 jhana factors arise. And then as you proceed through the formula, some of these more factors drop away, as we'll see. And there are some places where new elements are added, but this is just important to keep in mind as we go through the jhanas, because most fundamentally, jhana entails stages of letting go and a simplification of the mind, not so much stages of gaining. That would be a better way to think of it. Yeah? Yeah? Okay. So for this session then, we're going to go through the first jhana in detail, and then that will be our stopping point for today. And then next time we'll pick up with the second jhana. The jhana definition that we read, that's the standard definition, stock phrase, in about half the, I don't remember the exact percentage, but roughly, let's just say, half the places in the suttas, the definition appears. It's the bare definition as we've just seen. And in about the other half of the times, the definition is accompanied by the jhana similes. And so here, to really understand jhana, we need to bring in the whole simile, which we're going to read now. And the jhana similes are important in order to help us understand how are the suttas telling us to get into jhana, and more, it explains what they mean by the experience of jhana once you're in more detail. So the similes are very helpful. And as I mentioned earlier, in many places the suttas are not all that clear. I think the similes are a place in which the suttas are very clear and very accurate. So let's take a look. So I'm going to reread the definition of the first jhana along with the simile. Quite secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states, a monk enters and abides in the first jhana, which is characterized by rapture and pleasure born of seclusion and accompanied by thought and examination. He makes the rapture and pleasure born of seclusion drench, steep, fill, and pervade this body, so that there is no part of his whole body unpervaded by the rapture and pleasure born of seclusion. Just as a skilled bathman or bathman's apprentice heaps bath powder in a metal basin and sprinkling it gradually with water, kneads it till the moisture wets his ball of bath powder, soaks it and pervades it inside and out, yet the ball itself does not ooze. So too a bhikkhu, that's the monk, makes the rapture and pleasure born of seclusion drench, steep, fill, and pervade this body, so that there is no part of his whole body unpervaded by the rapture and pleasure born of seclusion. It's a great image. You get what's going on here? He's making soap. So he's taking this bath powder, mixing water. So there's two different things, right? And first of all, there's a lot of energy there, right? The bathman's working it, kneading it, right? It just goes on and on. Right? Kneads it, soaks it, pervades it. So there's a lot of energy and work going into this. So that gives us a sense of what's involved in leading up to jhana. And then it wets it so that there's the powder and the water blend into something new now. You no longer have powder or water. Now you've got this one thing, soap, because the water is, just pervaded throughout. That's what it means. It doesn't ooze. There's no leftover water dripping out anywhere. Similar, we take these factors. We're going to define them in a few moments. and they are suffused, drenched, steep fill and pervaded the whole body. So there's no part of your whole body unpervaded by the rapture and pleasure born of seclusion. And again, it may strike you that we just finished talking about the Visuddhimagga, where you can't feel your body. You can sure, it's pretty explicit here. I don't think there's any room for disagreement, right? Yeah. Okay. So this suffusing the jhana factors through the body is both a way to get into jhana, and it's a characteristic then of the experience once you've attained jhana. This is getting, so in the meditation instructions we've been given, these are not being recorded on the video. We're working progressively through the meditation instructions, and we'll see later that once the concentration gets very strong, and how it unfolds is unique for everyone. On its own, these experiences of being concentrated might suffuse themselves through your body. They might unfold in other ways in which then we might let go of, say, the breath, if that's what you're working with, or whatever practice you're doing. And we will consciously suffuse them. So we'll get in more detail on those instructions later. But that's just what it's talking about right here. So let's look at this definition in detail then. First of all, it starts off quite secluded from sensual pleasures. Well, hopefully that's pretty clear. The hindrances are not, the hindrances are suppressed while we're in jhana. Of course, when you come out, you're still liable for them to arise. But so we don't have to have no hindrances at all in order to go to jhana, but at least they have to be abandoned or brought down in intensity, let go of enough so that we can practice. And any of you who are experienced meditators know that we have to have some clarity of mind. And of course, hindrances come. It's part of what happens when we try to meditate. And during those times, it's nothing going wrong, and we don't want to get in a struggle or fighting against them. But we want to know that how to work with them skillfully, that we'll turn away from, we're not really on the concentration side of the practice now, we're leaning more on the insight side. And we need to let go of our suffering, do what we need to do to let go around the hindrances, maybe bring down the intensity. And then once our minds are clear, our bodies are relaxed, we come back to more leaning on the concentration side of the practice. So that's the basic idea. If you're buffeted by, a mind filled with, say, anger, it's not going to settle down and concentrate. So that's pretty, hopefully we all have that. And then it also says, sorry, I went out of order. That was the secluded for unwholesome states. It starts with, before it says that, it says secluded from sensual pleasures. But that's kind of similar, right? If we want our minds to settle down, what many of us do is, many people go on meditation retreats in which we let go of so much of the what consumes our lives. We still bring our minds in with us. So it doesn't mean our minds are automatically going to settle, but we certainly let go of the external things that pull us in so many ways, that keep us, the mind, stirred up and engaged. Or if you meditate at home, perhaps you might, maybe turn off the music or try to have a quiet place, or just some way to set up supportive external conditions, whatever that is. That's what it's talking about, to set up a support, right? Because our minds aren't so trained. Once the mind is trained, the external circumstances aren't hindrances anymore. But we need some support in order to get there. So that's what it's talking about by secluded from sensual pleasures and secluding from unwholesome states. Okay. So then let's look at the 5 jhana factors in detail. Okay. So if you'll turn to page 8 on your notes, the first 2, which I was, I've got the Pali here. Vitakka and Vichara. And actually I put them together as one phrase, Vitakka, Vichara. And let me read to you. I went through every place I could find and got every translation I could dig up. And you can see it's quite a range here. So let me read for Vitakka and Vitakka, Vichara. They're variously translated as reflection and investigation, thinking and pondering, thought and examination. That's the translation I've used. Applied and sustained thought, thought, conception, and discursive thinking, connecting and sustaining, initial and sustained mental application, and finally, directed thought and evaluation. So first we should say the term Vitakka rarely, sometimes might be used alone in the suttas, but the term Vichara rarely is, and really they should be taken as one expression. And I talked to one very well-known Pali scholar, and he said that you should just always take them as one phrase together, Vitakka, Vichara, so they work together. And we'll actually look at an example later that's kind of a little cryptic, but where they do get separated out in an alternate jhana definition. But it's kind of, anyway, you'll see that maybe next time. That's one thing. I want to take them as one phrase. And then you'll notice that there are two, if you take all these definitions, they fall into two basic categories. One is the act of directing your attention to some object and then sustaining it there. Directing and sustaining. And I think, isn't one of these actually was directing and sustaining? Well, here's one, applied and sustained thought. Right? Yes, connecting and sustaining another. Applying your attention and sustaining it there. Right? And then the other type of ways that this is defined is some kind of other mental activity. Now, connecting and sustaining is a mental activity, but here, look at these: reflection and investigation. That almost seems it can be discursive with words, but we can certainly, in a nonverbal way, sort of feeling into something, reflect and investigate. Thinking and pondering, thought and examination. First of all, according to the definition, this Vitakka Vichara is once you've entered in. It doesn't say anything about connecting and sustaining in order to get into jhana. It is that you enter and abide in the first jhana, and it's characterized then by having this. So if you think of it as connecting and sustaining, just the quality of the mind being connected and sustained, you would think of it like that. And we'll see that's the Visuddhimagga is explicit that that's how it understands it. In the suttas, it's actually not clear. And of every concept that we're going to explore throughout this entire series of meetings, Vitakka Vichara is the least clear of what the meaning actually was during the times when these were developed, several thousand years ago, more than that. We don't know what the meaning was there. And so this is another reason why, any meditative state that matches those words of the definition, by definition, that's jhana. And there could be many meditative states that are quite deep and powerful, maybe just as deep and powerful, but we might not call them jhana if they don't match this definition. And the problem is there's a huge range of meditative states and experiences that are very different from each other, but that match this verbal description, because we can take these words in a lot of different ways, right? And so many people can be teaching different things as jhana, and they're not wrong. They can legitimately claim to be teaching jhana, right? So that just adds to, hopefully doesn't add to the confusion. As we start to educate ourselves and understand, we can see that it's just a big world out there, and then we'll find our own way that works for us. Okay? So, in my definition, I was not taking sides, but I used thought and examination because it's more accurate to the real sort of the etymology of the word, the real like root meanings, what those words mean. But I don't mean it to, I'm real explicit about that. I don't mean it to be taking a side and how you should understand it. Okay, so we've got this factors, vitaka vichara, however we understand it. That's the first two. Then we've got the number 3 and 4, piti and sukha. Let me, that's what I translate as rapture and pleasure. And they say they're to be born of seclusion, because they really are kind of, as we become secluded from the hindrances, it's kind of a natural outcome of that kind of mind. So let me read you a few translations. Piti is translated rapture, bliss, joy, delight, zest, exuberance. Sukha, pleasure, happiness, joy, agreeable. Oh, sorry, I put pleasure in there twice. And bliss. Actually, bliss can be found in definitions for both. So you can see that piti and sukha are understood to be similar, but not the same. The Visuddhimagga gives us a lot of, it's very explicit about the kind of experiences you have. It goes into detail to describe, well, what piti is like. The suttas don't do that. They don't help us. And so, unless you're going to rely on the Visuddhimagga, if you just want to take the suttas on their own, again, they were probably clear about this back when these were being written down, or when they were in the oral tradition. But we don't, there's a range. So, I use it as bliss. And for sukha, which is similar, it's also pleasant. But to me, it's a little more smoothed out. It's not as intense. And I actually don't think of them, this is what I'm about to say, some people disagree with this, but I don't think of them as two different things. There's this experience we call piti and this thing called sukha, that it's just a part of a continuum. When the piti smooths out, it can become more the pleasure or happiness. And the way I translate it, when we're talking about feeling the sukha in the body, I use the term pleasure. And when we're talking about it more mental, I use happiness. It's just a stylistic choice in translating. Piti, so as I say here, piti can be mental or physical. The suttas don't tell us. Also the sukha. But in the third jhana, it's going to define sukha as a purely physical experience. So we'll see that later. And on page 9 here, just following up on that, let me just read here. Sukha is translated as happiness in those so I said pleasure when it's embodied. Happiness is translated, sukha is translated as happiness in those contexts when it's a quality leading up to jhana, which is more of a mental function. And then I quote this, one of the suttas here, concentration has a proximate cause, happiness. It's more of a mental. Happiness has a proximate cause, tranquility. Tranquility has a proximate cause, rapture. That's the piti. Rapture has a proximate cause, gladness. So, okay. So, stepping away from the texts, I just want to say something more practice-oriented. So this is not the Buddha speaking. It's just my own, this is just me. The experience of piti is highly individual. Some people do have this intense bliss. Bliss would be a good word, and it's quite powerful. They can feel, and it can be dramatic, lights, bliss, energies moving in the body, quite strong. And for other people, it can be pretty smoothed out. And so, and not so dramatic, even though it's pleasant. And so and again, the suttas aren't telling us that. So other teachers will say, no, that's not right. If it's most smoothed out, you've gone right into sukha. Okay, fine. But just give you a different perspective on that. Okay, so we've got a Vitakka Vichara, which I've called thought and examination, Piti and Sukha, we'll say bliss and happiness or pleasure. And the fifth, the Pali word is Ekaggata. That prefix, the Eka, means one, right? Remember we were talking about one, it can be unification, unification of mind, singleness of mind, one-pointedness, everything about one, okay? And so the fifth jhana factor here on page 9, Chittas Ekaggata, the chitta is the mind, and Ekaggata. So it means one-pointedness, singleness, or unification of mind. And we've talked about, so won't go into it, but the two different ways. It can be what I call unification of mind. The mind comes to oneness or stillness, but you haven't lost changing experiences, or one-pointedness, which is the exclusive fixed concentration. Okay. Okay, so that's the 5 jhana factors. So let's go back. We're going to end in a few minutes here for this session. Let's go back to the first jhana here, now that we've looked at the terms. And so we've said, quite secluded from sensual pleasures and secluded from unwholesome states, you enter and abide in the first jhana, which is characterized by rapture and pleasure. So this Piti and Sukha is what it is, which are born of seclusion, and accompanied by Vitakka Vichara, thought and examination. And then we get more practice-oriented. You make the rapture and pleasure, so this is Piti and Sukha, whether it's dramatic or it's lighter. So you have to see what's your own experience. And we don't want to fall into the trap of trying to compare to someone else. Oh, that person looks like their body's vibrating, and why aren't I getting that, or whatever. So it's whatever it is for you. You make this rapture and pleasure drench, steep, and fill and pervade your whole body. There's no part of your whole body unpervaded by that rapture and pleasure. And then it gives the simile of the bathman there. So when we put this into practice then, it may, this brings in the aspect of right effort. Right effort of the Eightfold Path. So right effort, you could call it wise or skillful effort. It needs to be the right amount of effort, and it needs to be directed in the right way. So in your practice, you're going to stay with, say you're doing mindfulness of breathing, you're just going to stay with that. We look to see how it unfolds, and depending on what happens, we have a different instructions we give. At some point, when it gets really, really strong, and right effort then changes in 2 ways. First, we direct the effort in a different way. The breath will have done its job. We don't try to cling to the breath. There's no mention of breath here in this definition. That's why it doesn't matter to me what practice you do. You could be doing body scans, mantras, mindfulness of sound. There's a lot of different kind of practices, just to name a few. I consider those doorways in, so we need to find what works best for each of us as a way in. Then, once we've dropped into the Samadhi, we look to see how it is, and it will start moving more into this suffusing kind of practice. So we're changing the kind of effort we're making, how we're using our effort, and also we'll see that we don't want to, how hard we have to work shifts. The Samadhi takes on its own momentum. So in the beginning, we might be like this bathman, and maybe we've got big muscles built up because we've had to work so hard, kneading this bath powder with the water to make the soap. But once you've got soap, you don't have to do anything, right? It's just there. You're not going to keep kneading it. Similarly, once this is, so there's effort, but once it's suffused through your whole body, that's just is a state of being. And the practice has taken on its own momentum, and you don't have to really do so much to make it happen.